Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of studying discourses in the time of COVID. No, this is the public presentation of student research projects conducted for the class Anthro 194 or Research Methods in Linguistic Anthropology. As I mentioned this morning, for those who watched this morning, these projects were conducted over the second semester of the current school year 2020-2021. And they focused on topics relating to local discourses and experiences from the past year in the time of the pandemic. No? So I'm Monica Santos from the Department of Anthropology. I was the instructor of these students this past semester. So this event is brought to you by the Linguistic Anthropology Resource Center of the UP Department of Anthropology. So this afternoon, the presentations will feature projects of students in section THW, which examine discourses generated on community quarantine guidelines in the HOH community, barangay circulars, and headlines on the vaccine rollout in the country. Okay. But before we begin the presentations, I'll just remind our participants in the room to keep their mic muted and video off. No? We will have an open forum after all the presentations are finished. No? So if you have questions or comments, please type them in the chat box, or for our viewers on Facebook, you can join in our discussion in the comment section. Okay. So lastly, I want to acknowledge my students and especially our guests who participated in the different projects, research projects, and also our viewers on Facebook. Thank you for your discussions today, for your contributions to the discussion today. Okay, so let's start with the first presentation. Our first presenters are Jeydah Cawed and Nina Ortega. I think they're here. Are they here?
Hello.
Ayan. Hi muna. Asa na sila? Okay. Yan. Okay, so their research is on barangay circulars that were distributed to the residents in Barangay White Plains. So Jeydah and Nina are here today to present their study, and the title of their project is Dear Ka-Barangay, Community Experiences During the COVID-19 Pandemic as Reflected in Barangay White Plains COVID Circular Series.
Good afternoon. We are Jeydah Cawed, Princess Cruz, and Nina Ortega, and we will be presenting our research titled Dear Ka-Barangay, Community Experiences During the COVID-19 Pandemic as Reflected in Barangay White Plains' COVID-19 Circular Series. So this is a discourse analysis on Barangay White Plains' COVID-19 circulars. The emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic entailed lockdowns and community quarantines nationwide. Because of this, Barangay White Plains launched the COVID-19 Circular Series for the residents. This includes updates about the national and local government's guidelines and the barangay situation during the pandemic, such as their policies and the community transmission of COVID-19. The speech community that we studied is Barangay White Plains, which involves 3 interlocutors, namely the barangay administrators, residents, and house employees. We were able to enter the speech community as one of our researchers is a resident. Vivon also says that a community broker can be used to introduce researchers to the speech community. In our case, we contacted the barangay administrator to refer us to some of our research participants. The material that we studied is the COVID-19 circular series of Barangay White Plains, which was found on their Facebook page. So on the screen is a screenshot of the Facebook page as well as the sample of the said circular. What is notable is the cover photo of the barangay's Facebook page, which reads, "Stay at home. It has never been easier to save lives." Here we highlight some of the elements of the COVID-19 circulars of White Plains, and we will tackle this more deeply in the later part of our presentation. The research questions we had for our study is number 1, what do the COVID-19 circulars of Barangay White Plains reveal about the relationships in the barangay and their roles? And number 2, What do COVID-19 circulars of Barangay White Plains reveal regarding their view and experiences of the COVID-19 pandemic? Next, we will be discussing the methodology we used in doing our research. To collect our data, we did field notes on the COVID-19 circulars dated March 15, 2020 to May 8, 2021. These were circulars numbers 1 to 51. However, a few of the circulars were missing from the Facebook page, so we were not able to include them in our study. To gain more insight about the experiences of the members of the community, we also had ethnographic interviews via Zoom and Messenger. And prior to the interview, we were in contact with our interviewees through text messaging, email, and Viber. We also constructed separate questionnaires for the barangay officials, residents, and house employees. Our interview question for the barangay officials concerned the processes of publication, the sourcing of information, purpose for their linguistic choices, and things concerning executive decisions and policymaking in the village. For the residents and house employees, we asked about their experience during the COVID-19 pandemic and their knowledge and perceptions regarding the COVID-19 circulars. To analyze our data, we use discourse analysis, particularly interpretative analysis or IA for the circulars and narrative analysis or NA for the ethnographic interviews to extract the big D discourses from the small d discourses. Now we will be presenting the findings of our research, the first of which is the information dissemination process regarding COVID-19 during the pandemic. So the barangay gets information from the local government units, testing centers, hospitals, as well as COVID-19 patients who are residents and frequently ask questions from the residents as well. These LGUs and other units get their information from the national government. In the diagram, the national government is in the parentheses because it was only implicitly mentioned. The barangay is made out of the punong barangay, barangay council or kagawads, and other barangay officials. Together, through the circulars, the barangay informs the residents and their house employees, who in turn inform other members of their household. So other members of the household can include the children of the residents. House employees used to talk with neighboring house employees. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this channel of communication has halted. The residents and house employees are also able to give feedback and raise their concerns to the barangay directly or through purok leaders who are in charge of addressing general concerns and inquiries. However, because of the pandemic, the channel of communication to the purok leaders has been limited. Some feedback from residents include what they want to be included or excluded in the circulars. Next, we were able to better understand how the circulars are produced. So first, data is gathered from the Quezon City government, testing centers, hospitals, and COVID-19 patients from White Plains. Then it is validated by the barangay. They do contact tracing and visit the household. Once data is validated, the circular is drafted by the punong barangay or two other kagawads. If it is made by two other kagawads, it is first proofread by the punong barangay before it is approved by the barangay council. After approval, it is then released and distributed through print or online via Facebook and Viber. The release and distribution of the circulars are not scheduled. It is done upon the occurrence of new cases of infection, recoveries, or shifts in community quarantine. We also found out about the governance system. So on top is the local and national government, then the barangay officials, and then the purok leaders. The purok leaders, as we have mentioned a while ago, can raise concerns to the barangay officials from the residents. On this slide are the types of circulars released during the COVID-19 pandemic. We focused on the COVID-19 circular series that discusses COVID-19 guidelines and cases within the barangay. So this is highlighted in the slide. COVID-19 circulars may include both guidelines and COVID-19 case updates, but there are also circulars in which only guidelines or updates are presented. For the regular circular series mentioned on this slide, we only mentioned specific circulars which concerned with COVID-19, such as the vaccination program, discussion about the vaccine, free swab tests, and about ayudas. Specifically for the COVID-19 circular, we observed that in the use of language, it is written in formal English, or what is called the language of business. It is in line with a local government unit's language use, and it is also associated with with the informational content of the circulars and is preferred by the residents. The COVID-19 circulars present information that is summarized and is publicly accessible. Interestingly, a particular circular addressed to the House employees was written in Filipino instead of English. This is an example of that circular which is addressed to the House employees. Now we will look closer at the COVID-19 circulars. The general parts of the circular include the circular number, date, and salutation, which are highlighted on the slide. The greeting, Dear Ka-Barangay, we feel invokes a feeling of togetherness and that the sender of the message is a fellow community member. Next, the body of the circulars include the community guidelines and or the COVID-19 case updates. So some circulars are about guidelines only, while some are about COVID-19 cases in the community. Other circulars have both of these sections in one.
Next, the community guidelines include the public safety hours or curfew, permission to use facilities or go outside, and access to the community's gates. While COVID-19 updates include the number of active and new cases, recovered cases, and deaths in the barangay, which is comparable to other barangays, like a scoreboard, as well as the relative safety to leave home. If there are not much cases, a resident would go out. New cases include details on the presence of symptoms, patient's location, and COVID-19 tests. The anonymity of infected individuals is kept for data privacy to encourage residents' disclosure and to avoid causing panic. Below is an example of how it is described. Included are sex, age, and community role or position, which will be elaborated later. For the closing remarks, they emphasize the virus as a threat, and additional guidelines and updates are here too. The friendly tone is evident in the use of, we remind everyone, please, assist, and you may. Here's the evolution of the signatory. At first, it was just the Punong Barangay's name and signature, but now it includes the Barangay White Plains Council as well. The signature is added there to make it an official document. The differentiated individuals are senior citizens, house employees or runners, residents, barangay and village employees, and health workers. House employees include kasambayas and drivers who are also known as runners because they run errands. The use of public safety hours instead of curfew is adopted from the Quezon City government's announcements. Curfew is viewed to sound too militaristic. Quarantine and house lockdown are used together. In this series, quarantine basically means isolation, but house lockdown adds that the household will not violate protocols and finish their quarantine. The circulars are disseminated through physical copies and online channels. Printed ones are distributed to each household and posted around the village too. It supposedly caters to older generations while the online copies are for the younger generations. However, younger members of the household rely on older members for news. The shift to online platforms allow for more interaction, unlike the physical copies, especially through their Viber group, Barangay Balita. So this is a formerly biannual newsletter that shifted to Viber where all announcements are shared. Here's a sample of its first issue in 2019. Unfortunately, we do not have access to the Viber group, so we cannot delve into it. For our analysis, we have first, the formal informational channels as legitimate sources. We found out that the community relies on the barangay for information. It consolidates information from government mandates and community members and distributes information through circulars, which are written in formal English. The community associates English with informative, reliable, and legitimate content. The letter format is also related to formality. Residents and house employees are hindered from communicating with one another, so the circulars and feedback from residents allow communication networks to remain active in the community. By following the national government and LGUs, the barangay shares the legitimacy of their authority. Consequently, the barangay also uses circulars for social controls through guidelines inside and outside the community, which needs to be followed by the people. Residents and house employees base their routines on the circulars. For instance, when they only go out for errands or sports based on the barangay's policy on who can go out or use sports facilities and when, respectively. Narratives strengthen the image of COVID-19 as a threat to strengthen also the limitations on people as descriptions of cases are related with rules to encourage people to cooperate. People identified in circulars are differentiated because they are the ones at risk for infection, so they are monitored. Senior citizens are vulnerable from sickness. House employees and barangay employees frequently go out. Their role is also used as a probable cause for infection. For example, runner siya kaya nag-positive or senior kasi kaya nahawaan. As said earlier, circulars connect community members, especially when residents just keep to themselves. COVID-19 updates are used to compare the barangay situation with other barangays. For instance, residents compare the number of cases to others to assess if their barangay is in a relatively safe situation. So, the barangay is advantage as seen in their ability to adapt to changes during the pandemic. They also see the barangay as Class A, which is basically a gated community with security. Residents can also hire employees to do their errands for them while they stay at home. And from our data, the residents access hospitals without the barangay's assistance. Despite the barangay's authority, the friendly tone in the circulars, as seen in the words please, may, and kindly inform, and addressing the audience as Ka-Barangay, suggests that they are firm but imploring to their audience. From there, here are our conclusions. So, the friendly tone used in the circulars show that the barangay officials are not necessarily above the residents or their kabarangay, even when they implement guidelines as an authority. Also, the barangay is the community's source of information, while circulars are the communication channels. The narrative of the virus as a threat highlight the importance of collective action to address the virus. Lastly, the residents' ability to stay home is because there are house employees who can run errands for them. And to end the presentation, Durante says that the emphasis on discourses as technologies of knowledge make us aware of the role of language in institutional efforts to organize and hence control the private lives of members of society. And this resonates throughout our observations in the discourses involving COVID-19 circulars of Barangay White Plains. Thank you for listening. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Jeydah and Nina. Our second presentation comes from Chelsea Aquino, Joulianna Cagurangan, Francesca Mauricio, and Francesca Santiago, the two Francescas. Okay, and diba? I'll say hi to our audience. Ayan. Asan yung isa pa? Apat lang ba? Si ano? Yan, Juliana. Okay. Naka-off ka. Okay, o sige. So yung their research, no, yung research ni Nina Chelsea, Juliana, and the two Francescas focused on the experiences of the hard of hearing community, and they conducted narrative analysis of posts in their Facebook group during the pandemic.
Good afternoon, everyone. The title of our study is A Narrative Analysis of the Posts in a Hard of Hearing Person's Facebook Group. So we chose this topic because during the pandemic, there are limited discussions about hard of hearing persons' experience, especially considering that their methods of communication have been impeded by protective measures such as mask wearing. So first, we have to define some commonly confused words such as hard of hearing, late deafened, and deaf. First, hard of hearing or HOH. Hard of hearing persons experience mild to moderate hearing loss, so they may rely on assistive devices and communicate through oral language. People under this category may also be deaf but do not have or want any affiliation with any capital D deaf community. Next is the late deafened. Late deafened persons grew up hearing and know how to communicate orally but lost their hearing later in their lives. Next is the uppercase deaf people who share a particular language like the American Sign Language and participate in their own community. And lastly, we have the lowercase deaf people who simply have the medical condition of hearing loss. Because hard of hearing and uppercase and lowercase deaf people differ in their conditions and modes of communication, our hard of hearing informants consider them as a separate disability group from uppercase and lowercase deaf persons. However, they also claim that this is not a distinction commonly known. Hence, spreading awareness about the identity of hard of hearing persons is one of the primary purposes and reasons behind the establishment of our community.
The COVID-19 pandemic has posed particular challenges for hard of hearing persons. Several protective measures against the virus have heightened the difficulties confronted by hard of hearing persons when communicating. For instance, dahil they use oral language, mask wearing has impeded lip reading, muffled sounds, and brought discomfort when worn together with hearing aids. So, as access to jobs and services became more difficult, the COVID-19 pandemic has marginalized hard of hearing persons due to protective measures that do not take their needs into account.
Okay, so in relation to our study, we tried to consider how this could possibly affect their subjectivity. But first and foremost, let us try to define subjectivity. According to Lerman in 2006, the subjectivity of an individual is tied to the way they emotionally and physiologically experience their surrounding world and how this world in turn acts upon them. An individual's subjectivity or their shared subjectivities with a community of people is usually in capitulation to an external authority. But more often than not, an emotional response of resistance still forms against the dominance that is being exerted on them. In relation to our study, the experience of marginalization felt by hard of hearing persons has an influence on their feelings and perceptions of subjectivity, especially as they are compelled to confront the discrete yet still harmful discriminations posed by COVID-19 health protocols.
With all these considered, we came up with the question: what did a post in a Facebook group for hard of hearing people during April 2021 reveal about the subjectivity of hard of hearing persons? To answer this question, we turned to a Facebook group catered towards the needs of hard of hearing persons. We conducted our study in a private Facebook group catering to the needs of hard of hearing people in the Philippines. According to the group's About page, the Facebook group aims to create a space for the hard of hearing experience and bring forth the advancement of their rights and advocacies by raising awareness and creating a hard of hearing based identity and community. As of writing, the group has a membership of 1,310 members. To conduct the study, we collected a total of 46 posts from April 2021. The posts during this period are composed of both shared and original posts, which include advertisements on job openings, schools, and hearing aids or devices, invitations to webinars, related articles, inquiries, and first-hand narratives. These posts were collected using a participant observation method adapted from Willis 2019 to better suit the online nature of the Facebook group. However, since Willis's research was done on a public newsfeed and ours on a private group, the researchers opted to obtain the administrator's permission before commencing with data gathering. After collecting the data, the posts were subjected to an elimination process based on the number of reactions and unique comments that the post received from the group. The posts from April 2021 that did not receive any engagements were not included in the analysis. Once the posts with no engagements were eliminated, posts detailing specific experiences as hard of hearing people were then subjected to further analysis. To further substantiate the findings from these posts, 4 semi-structured interviews with members and administrators of the group were conducted. The members were chosen based on which post garnered the most engagements at the time of collection. The researchers also reached out to the administrators of the group. The administrators that were interviewed were the ones that responded affirmatively to the researchers' invitation for interviewing. Each set of interview questions were tailored to the interviewee. The questions were constructed according to the role of each informant. For members, additional questions to gain deeper understanding of their particular post were also asked. To avoid unethical research practices, the researchers made sure to obtain informants' free and informed prior consent. The same was done for the posts that were included in the presentation.
So, to begin the analysis, the researchers first narrowed down posts which included first-hand narratives about the hard of hearing experience in the time of COVID-19. This amounted to two posts. These posts were then subjected to a narrative analysis adapted from Bernard 2011. This involved dissecting the posts to reveal a common structure in their storytelling. The analysis also uncovered a common theme among the posts. To further contextualize the findings from the narrative analysis, the researchers turned to the other posts in the group that were not necessarily narratives and also to the interviews that were conducted. Altogether, these analytical methods brought forward insights on the subjectivity of the members of the community.
For the findings and analysis, we found that the overarching theme of their posts is the marginalization that they experience as people that cannot perform oral language up to certain standards. They see themselves as occupying a marginal position that is informed and compounded by class and orality, which in turn reveals subjectivity. To expound on this, let us first talk about orality. Unlike lowercase and uppercase deaf people, those that consider themselves to be HOH are usually capable of performing spoken language as per one informant. Because of this, they are forced to operate in a hearing world. This is where their struggles usually manifest themselves. An example of this would be one informant's confrontation with the lady guard, as seen in this passage. The language ideology of orality, which proposes that languages are fundamentally oral and non oral languages are treated as secondary at best and unnatural at worst, comes into play here. This is further compounded by the fact that, according to one informant, hard of hearing is an emerging status, so there aren't many avenues for them to interact and express themselves freely. They said that people often mistake them with the uppercase and lowercase deaf community. They emphasized in our interviews that there is a clear distinction between the two groups. Because of this lack of knowledge regarding their status, medical and institutional acknowledgement of their hearing status is also denied from them sometimes.
This marginalization is also reflected in the narratives na they shared to hard of hearing persons Facebook group. Members who shared narratives of their first-hand experiences appeared to be seeking solidarity from fellow hard of hearing members of the group. This is suggested by regularities in the structure and themes evident in their narratives. The two narratives shared to the group both recounted conflict with non-hard of hearing persons due to their condition. For example, as mentioned earlier, one recounted an argument with the security guard after being denied entry to a government office due to a memo that allegedly prohibits PWDs from entry. Conflict escalated because the hard of hearing member cannot communicate with the security guard up to standards. For the structure, these narratives begin with the contextualization of the event, followed by a detailed narration of the conflict with a non-hard of hearing person and their ensuing response. Drawing from their narratives, the members responded either by negotiating with the non-hard of hearing or by conceding at once. They concluded their stories by reiterating the difficulty of their condition. Evident in these narratives is a diffusion of accountability. By this, we mean that it appears as if they were trying to dispel the blame away from themselves. So, this is manifested, one, in their usage of linguistic forms, such as adverbs of degree, auxiliary verbs expressing ability, and enclitic particles that appear to soften the complexity of the request to the non-hard of hearing, depicting careful resistance to dominant modes and figures. Is also manifested through the detailed contextualization and narration of the event, and finally, through the reiteration of their condition upon their conclusions. By ensuring that they were acting within the bounds of acceptable actions, they seek to garner validation and solidarity from fellow hard of hearing members, possibly to feel a sense of belonging to the group in response to lack of spaces for hard of hearing persons. So, with their marginalization brought about by their inability to perform oral language up to standards, hard of hearing persons can ameliorate their marginal position by improving their hearing through hearing aids. The significance of these devices is reflected by the number of posts by members selling hearing aids, as well as the amount of engagements to these posts. It is also seen in how the experiences and living conditions of our informants who had access to hearing aids differ from our informants who do not have the financial means to acquire these.
From that, the ability to break from their marginalized position is also somewhat tied to class and socioeconomic struggles. Our data reveals some of the privileges available to those who are able to afford and have access to hearing aids, which help them perform oral language better. Those who are less privileged are not able to purchase expensive hearing aids. This hinders them from being able to perform and live up to certain standards for oral language. That being said, how they see themselves in their marginal position is also affected by their access to hearing aids, in that those who are able to financially acquire this device do not necessarily find their being a hard of hearing person as a hindrance to performing oral language, and are hence able to conform better to a predominantly oral external world. Whereas those who aren't able to afford hearing aids are impeded from complying with the standards of oral language and are hence marginalized from experiencing certain privileges that non-hard of hearing persons are able to access more efficiently. For instance, the following passages further emphasize the influence of class disparities on the experiences of hard of hearing persons as they discuss the importance of hearing aids. Some of our informants mentioned that their hearing aid is necessary for work, making it seem as a prerequisite for access to employment. Other passages also discussed how expensive hearing aids are, and that usually only those who have financial advantage are able to afford it.
So for the last part of our research is the conclusion. So the subjectivity of the hard of hearing persons in our study is informed by the marginalization that they experience brought about by a constant need to operate in a hearing world, wherein hard of hearing persons encounter conflict or negotiation with non-hard of hearing persons to obtain most and even the most basic of their needs. In turn, hard of hearing persons view themselves as obliged to conform to a world that is significantly dominated by language ideology of orality. They also understand their marginalization and ensuing conformity as a matter of socioeconomic class. Because the hearing world is not their space, hard of hearing persons also view their marginalization as a result of not belonging to the hearing world. Thus, they seek solidarity in online communities which cater to people with similar experiences that do not necessitate the performance of oral language.
Okay, thank you, Chelsea, Juliana, Cheska, and Mao for your presentation. Our next presentation, our next report is coming from Dale Mercurio, Nathan Ramos, Putri Wadi, and Jonahlyn Pagdanganan. Are they here? Sino ba ang nandito sa... Ayan. Nathan and Putri are here. Yeah, so they represent their group. So they studied tweets about community quarantine guidelines. Huh? And the title of their presentation, ang cute ng kanilang title, Quarantweet. Perception of Twitter users in the Philippines on community quarantine guidelines.
Good afternoon, everyone. Here is our study entitled Quarantweet, Perception of Twitter Users in the Philippines on Community Quarantine Guidelines. The research question we seek to answer is what do tweets commenting on news items about community quarantine guidelines suggest about local understanding of such guidelines, more specifically, the discourse they generate. We also have the sub-questions, how do Twitter users express their sentiments/feelings in their tweets, and what topics are discussed by Twitter users who react to news items about community quarantine guidelines. So, why Twitter? It's because Twitter is a publicly accessible platform that is used by many people of different socio-cultural backgrounds. It is a melting pot of many speech communities and free information, which would be able to provide the much-needed insight. The speech community we studied are Twitter users that one, have tweets that can be seen by the public, meaning no private accounts were taken in consideration, and two, responded to any of the 5 chosen news outlets regarding community quarantine guidelines and shifts. Here are the news media outlets we focused on: ABS-CBN News, GMA News, Rappler, CNN Philippines, and Inquirer. Lastly, here are the community quarantine guidelines in the Philippines: the Enhanced Community Quarantine, or ECQ, the Modified Enhanced Community Quarantine, or MECQ, the Modified General Community Quarantine, or MGCQ, and the General Community Quarantine, or GCQ.
So the next part of our report is the methodology. Next slide, please. In choosing the media outlets, our group based it on number of Twitter followers. The group then shows the accounts that have the highest followers, which are Rappler, ABS-CBN, GMA, CNNPH, and Inquirer. We also made sure that these accounts were verified and legitimate. Next slide, please. The group chose randomly from the consented tweets. The members of the group sent a direct message to each of the Twitter users in order to ask for their consent in including their tweet in the analysis and presentation. Next slide, please. So, ang ginamit namin na main method for analyzing ay yung ethnography of speaking or communication ni Delheims. So, some of the reasons kung bakit namin ito napili. One, this helps represent a descriptive data about the ways in which social meaning is conveyed, how speech and other channels of communication are used in diverse communities. In this case, gusto namin ma-understand the way people understand two tweets, kung ano ba ang meaning ng guidelines sa kanila, at kung paano nila pinag-uusapan yung guidelines na ito. And the second reason is context is crucial. A context can support a range of meanings. Since magkakaiba yung socio-cultural backgrounds, context at thought processes ng Twitter users, applicable na gamitin namin ang method ni Hams para mas mabigyan namin ng meanings yung tweets nila in a way na maintindihan din ng iba. And then third is intention is to collect information on the patterns of language use within a speech community. So we tend to learn more on the patterns of language by looking at the small d discourse and then coming up with the big D discourse, which we will discuss later on. Next slide.
To analyze the tweets, we employed the method of thematic analysis. The themes were created based on tones, feelings, and topics showed in the tweets. These themes can be grouped under color-coded levels, specifically red, orange, yellow, and green. Next slide, please. The limitations of this study are time constraints and the small number of people who gave permission to analyze their tweets. Thus, we were only able to interview 2 people and analyze 25 tweets. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In our study, the speech events are the act of quoting tweets or replying to tweets of media companies. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, there are themes under the 4 levels. For the red level, the tweets express frustration and hopelessness and contain sentiments that criticize the government. So let's look at this example. Puta, nasa ng guidelines, lunes na in a few hours. So nga muna. We can see that the person is frustrated and seems to criticize the government. For the orange level, the tweets express frustration, disappointment, humor, and mockery through sarcasm. In the example, the person shows his disappointment through the use of sarcasm. Ganun talaga guys, quarantine lang tayo ng quarantine kasi wala tayong plano. Tweets in the yellow level express humor and mockery through jokes and puns. In the example, he referenced a joke gotten from Facebook. Tweets in the green level are hopeful and shows relief. In the example, The first sentence expresses relief and the second shows hopefulness. Next slide, please.
After identifying the speech events and the themes, we identify the factors and functions of these speech events, specifically for each of the individual tweets. These are 7 factors identified by Hives. These are the sender, receiver, channel, code, topic, message form, and setting, under which we can find scenes on which the speech event is happening. Although the rest of the factors were also considered and factored in identifying the functions of the tweets, our research focuses on the topic and message forms of each individual tweet. We chose to focus on these given the nature of Twitter and how Twitter users interact. Topic and message form are the factors that vary from tweet to tweet. So we first discussed the other factors as these are mostly similar across all tweets. The sender of the tweets are the Twitter users themselves, and the receiver of the tweets is the public who have access to the tweets, including the followers of the Twitter user. The channel is the tweets themselves, which also includes the character limitation of Twitter, and the code is the language used. This includes English, Filipino, and often Taglish. The setting is Twitter, and specifically the scenes we are looking into are the quote and reply tweets to the news tweets put out by any of the 5 media outlets mentioned. Topic is the news tweets and what the reply or quote tweets are about, while the message form refers to the various forms and tones of the tweets. So this includes, for example, interjections, emojis, sarcasms, quotations, etc. Next slide, please. Individually, the topics of the tweets vary into their specific contexts and the news tweets that they are engaging with. We identified some of these generalized topics, but the tweets themselves can still be understood on their own contexts. Most of the tweets are about voicing out frustrations and contain sentiments against the government or questioning the government. Other tweets express hopelessness and mockery of the community quarantine guidelines. While some tweets show disappointment, others also show humor, hopefulness, relief, and sometimes seeking clarifications or validations. Next slide, please. In message form, we identify the tones and the register of the tweets. This also includes what words they use, emojis, interjections, etc. Generally, the tone of the tweets expresses frustrating and sarcastic tones. In terms of the register, due to the nature of tweet itself, majority of the tweets were informal and casual, while very, very few were contain formal registers. Next slide, please. As we have identified the factors, we look into the speech functions of the tweet, which is defined under the context of their use. By analyzing the topic and the message form, we have identified the prevalence of referential, expressive, and accessory functions. Other functions such as directive, metalinguistic, poetic, and contextual were also used. The accessory function, which is outside of Himes' 7 broad types of speech functions, was identified by the group to be able to adapt to the online setting. The accessory function utilizes the message form of the tweet, such as the use of emojis, keyboard smashes, and online slang words like lol, to supplement the emotions and tones in the online discourse that otherwise will be hard to identify without these applications. The functions were identified and analyzed in relation also with our interviews as well, as these interviews allowed us to gain insights into the thought process of the Twitter users and who engage with the news media tweets themselves. Next slide, please.
So the next part of our report is the group will present some examples of the tweets we analyzed in order for you to have an idea of how the process went. So the first example tweet is from one of our interviewees. Looking at the quoted tweet, the Twitter user voiced out their frustration and sentiments against the government through a series of questions. The group decided that it had an informal, casual register since the tone is somewhat conversational. At first glance, it may look formal, but the reason that it is not is because of the user's failure to use complete words and go for contractions instead. Example is that they use the word what apostrophe s instead of using the full phrase of what is. As for the function, a function that we chose is directive because of the user's use of rhetorical questions in order to address the government and the issue itself. It is also referential as the user used past experiences and events in order to state their opinion and emphasize their point at the end. Next slide, please.
For the next tweet, mukhang aabot tayo ng Pascu. This tweet expresses frustration on the recurring community quarantine by using puns. Pascu can be understood as Pasko, and the use of the capital Q refers to the Q in quarantine. The register of this tweet is informal and casual since the tone used is conversational. The function is poetic since a play on words can be considered poetic, and the other one is accessory as proven by the use of emojis. Next slide, please.
In this example, the Twitter user used a quote to express hopelessness. The register would then be formal since the user tweeted the quote in formal English, and frozen since a quote is oftentimes a fixed statement. Finally, the function observed here is metalinguistic, again due to the usage of a quote, and poetic since the quote is being connected to the pandemic response.
So going back to our research question, let us examine how we have come to answer these using the ethnography of communication and allow us to understand the Big D discourse in order to understand how the Twitter users understood the guidance locally. In the previous slides, we saw how the topic and message form affects how the tweet functions in relation to the news tweets. Next slide, please. After analysis, we thus attempt to understand what people know about the quarantine guidelines and in relation to their experiences during the pandemic. The Big D discourse was also understood with the interview plus our findings on the tweets. One of the first things that we learned is that tweets focus more on the existence of the shifts and lack of change. The quoted news tweets are used to express their opinion on the pandemic, even if it is not directly related to the news tweet itself. The tweeter used the news tweets as a means to be able to share their experiences and sentiments regarding how the pandemic is happening and in general how it is being handled. They express their sentiments in a variety of factors and functions. The topics range from voicing out frustrations to expressing hopefulness, which in turn gives us insight with a wide range of experiences that people have. The discussion by Twitter users emphasize their opinions and reactions regarding the community quarantine guidelines. Lastly, the public nature of Twitter allows for the speech community to engage with news outlets, even if they are not followed by those users, which allows conversations and discourses of same or clashing sentiments. Having engagement on these said tweets also tells us some insights on the shared experiences of those who tweeted and those that engaged with the tweet, their shared experiences towards the pandemic. And with that, we thank you for listening to our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Nathan and Putri. Our last presentation is prepared by Joshua Evangelista and Nika Jimenez. I think they're both here. Ayan. Okay, sige. So for the research of Nika and Joshua, no, they did critical discourse analysis of headlines relating to the vaccine rollout of the country. Okay, so here is their presentation.
In this video, I will be presenting our research project entitled A Critical Discourse and Analysis of Headlines in Online Print Media on the COVID-19 Vaccine Rollout in the Philippines. First, I will talk about the background of our study and the significance of our study. News media is one form of mass media that has the capacity to disseminate information to the general public. As a result, they have the ability to communicate and maintain particular ideologies as a result of their linguistic choices due to their wide reach. For our study, we will be focusing on online news. Changes in technology has altered the way that news is produced and consumed. For instance, in a 2019 survey conducted by the SWS, 32% of all Filipino adults use social media platforms such as Facebook to get their news. Generally, posts by news agencies on these platforms link the news articles to their own websites. By design, headlines are the most prominent thing that a person would see. when looking at these posts. This is an example of a post by a major news outlet, Rappler. Notice how the headline is very prominent in this image. Why are headlines significant? According to Van Dyke, headlines and leads of news reports express semantic macrostructures as defined by the journalists and may thus give rise to preferred macrostructures of mental models. In addition, according to Javed and Mahmood, news headlines are a way to deliver a fast food of information for those who have no time to read the complete article. The headline, according to Mooney and Evans, gives the reader a sense of shape and the direction of the story. Vocabulary choice can display a topic in a certain way. As a result, the media has the power to filter information to preserve or abolish a certain discourse through the use of headlines. Next, I will be talking about our research questions. First, what are the prevailing small v/big D discourses present in the headlines regarding the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine? Second, what ideologies are perpetuated by the media when writing headlines regarding the vaccine? And third, how does the media perpetuate these ideologies? Next, I will be talking about the methodology of our study. To begin, I will be talking about our analytical framework. Discourse, according to Fairclough, is meaning making as an element of the social process. The social process is an interplay between three levels of social reality: social structures, practices, and events. So, discourse leads us to ask questions such as why are specific word choices made? Our structures in language can be revealed, and one can understand how these are being shaped and how they are shaped by society. To learn about the meanings that we give language, we use discourse analysis as our main tool. Specifically, we utilized critical discourse analysis so that we can understand how language can be tied to politically, socially, or to culturally contentious issues. According to Fairclough, critical discourse analysis can be understood as a normative and explanatory critique. Normative because it does not simply describe existing realities, but also evaluates them. And explanatory, it does not simply describe existing realities, but seeks to explain them. For our study, we looked at three dimensions of discourse. First is the text, meaning and form of written or spoken language. Discourse practice, which refers to the practices of text production and consumption. And next, sociocultural practice, which broadens the scope of the research to observe the situational context surrounding the text. Our analysis is divided into two parts. First, the macrostructures. Under macrostructure, we looked at the social cultural practice, which refers to how these meanings are influenced by the wider cultural context, and discourse practice, which under it has text production. So, how do journalists construct headlines? And text consumption. How does the public interpret these headlines? Under the microstructure, we looked at the semantic relations between propositions and rhetorical features of a news report. Under this is the text, which refers to the semantic structures, such as how do words used imply specific meanings. We also looked at genres, or according to Fairclough, are the semiotic ways of acting and interacting, such as laws in reports or editorials in newspapers. For our methodological approach, we used the inductive method, where we collected the data first, or the news headlines, and formed questions as the headlines were critically analyzed. In terms of data collection, we collected 12 headlines from top online news outlets in the country. The news articles that we chose were written at the start of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout in the Philippines. And finally, we interviewed three authors to further understand the process of text production. We asked questions like, why was this specific word used in this context? And how the headlines are constructed to target their audience. For data analysis, we divided it into two sections. First, the microstructure analysis, which focuses on the construction of the headlines. So under this is text, so why were specific words chosen, and do these words imply specific meanings? Second, we also looked at the macro structure analysis, where we looked at the social cultural practice and how these meanings are influenced by the wider cultural context. So under this is the vaccine situation in the country. On the other hand, we also analyze discourse practice. First is text production. So under this would be the discursive devices present in the headlines. So we looked at how these devices are used in the headlines by the journalists to attract the attention of the readers. On the other hand, we also looked at text consumption, and we focused on how the target audience could interpret these headlines.
The report on our findings and analysis include collected data from the headlines chosen and interviews conducted with 3 journalists from the top news sources in the country. In this research, 12 headlines on the vaccine rollout last March 1, 2021 were collected from 5 different news outlets and encoded with the following format: H followed by the assigned number, the italicized headline title, and the news source in parentheses. The table shown on the screen presents the final selected headlines for the research. 2 headlines were each collected from ABS-CBN News Online, Rappler, and CNN Philippines, while 3 headlines were collected each from GMA News Online and Inquirer.net. To further understand the context of the headline sampled, interviews with journalists from Rappler, GMA News Online, and ABS-CBN News Online were conducted from May to June of 2021. The research informants were asked about the process of headline making, an elaboration on the headlines of the articles they've written, and the target audience of their articles. Our first informant from Rappler shared that there are 3 important factors to consider in headline making. The first and most important factor considered by informant number 1 is accuracy, because this is an aspect that cannot be sacrificed, or else inaccurate information will be disseminated. The second factor to be considered in headline making is brevity, especially now on social media where one can't have very long headlines. Third is clarity, in order for the reader to understand what the journalist is saying just by reading the headlines. When asked about the articles published, informant number 1 shared that the inclusion of the qualifier legally in H10, Philippines begins legally rolling out first COVID-19 vaccines, was intentional. This was done to be more accurate about the context of the start of the rollout last March 1, since there were vaccinations that took place before the actual rollout of vaccines. Informant number 1 also shared that the word uncertainty was used in H9, Philippines to start the vaccine campaign amid uncertainty, to put into better context the scenario surrounding the start of the vaccine rollout here in the Philippines. When the H9 article was published, it was the first story written before the first legal vaccine in the country. Informant number 1 explained that the word uncertainty was used because of the many unknowns surrounding the vaccine rollout in the country, including the unregulated vaccination that took place before the official rollout, a delay in the arrival of vaccines due to a mix-up of paperwork, and vaccine hesitancy among healthcare workers and the public. When asked about the readership of the articles, informant number 1 explained that their target audience is the general public, as they want to reach as wide an audience as possible. Informant number 2 is a journalist from GMA News Online. For informant number 2, being cautious in wording stories is the number 1 priority, especially when writing stories related to vaccines. Informant number 2 identified 2 reasons for choosing this factor as the most important in headline making, with the first being the high vaccine hesitancy in the country, and the second reason concerning the readership of the audience, since sometimes people just read the headlines and take it as the full story. She also noted that in their newsrooms, editors always include the name of the talking head in the headlines and that this attribution in the headline matters a lot. When asked about the articles published, informant number 2 shared that the mention of Galvez in H3, Galvez gets Sinovac COVID-19 vaccine at PGH, is in line with their editor's preference of including attributions in the headline. Informant number 2 also noted that the editors prefer to mention the name of the official instead of their title since, and I quote, it's a lot easier to identify the person talked about immediately. End of quote. When asked about H5, 100 PGH staff to get Sinovac COVID-19 vaccine on first day of rollout, M-exec, and the use of the word exec, informant number 2 explained that for officials who are less widely known, the editors prefer to use the terms exec or official instead in order to better resonate with the public. As for H4, Philippines administers first official COVID-19 vaccine jab, informant number 2 shared that it was the editor who added the word official to highlight that the March 1 vaccine rollout is the official, government-sanctioned rollout. As for their target audience, informant number 2 shared that it is also the general public, as they try to appeal to as general an audience as possible. The last informant interviewed wrote news articles for ABS-CBN News Online. Informant number 3 shared that prominence is the most important factor to be considered in headline making since there is a wide pool of competition online. Headlines then should spark curiosity among the readers so they are enticed to click and read the article. When asked about the use of PGH head in H1, PGH head receives first ever COVID-19 vaccine jab in PH. Informant number 3 shared that this was used because of brevity and because they rarely use the names of people unless it's a very prominent person. When asked about the readership and perceived influence of their articles, informant number 3 shared that the media would like to think that they are influential among their readers. However, she also noted the challenges faced by the media as the messages that resonate in the public are the messages that they see outside of the media. In this section, the data and results discussed in the previous section will be studied using micro and macro analysis. From the 12 headlines sampled, 5 discursive devices were identified, namely evaluative language, vocabulary, reference to elite people and/or role label, immediacy, and quantification. The first discursive device includes the use of evaluative language in the headlines to evoke positive and negative reactions, as well as ambiguity among its readers. For instance, as seen in the table, the use of action verbs such as administers in H4, begins in H6 and H10, boost demands in H7, to lead in H8, to start in H9, first to receive in H11, and taking first shots in H12 imply progress and a new beginning, which are used to indicate that the March 1 rollout signifies a new chapter in the country. On the other hand, words such as delayed in H6 and amid uncertainty in H9 can evoke feelings of disappointment and fear among its readers. The second discursive device is vocabulary, which brings attention to the choice of words in the headlines. In the headlines presented on the screen, the use of the words first, legal, and official are intentional to give reference to the vaccinations that took place before the actual rollout of vaccines in the country, and so better contextualizing the state of the vaccine rollout last March 1. The third discursive device is reference to elite people and/or role label in headlines, which has long been known as instrumental in generating interest. By the mention of PGH head receiving the first official jab in H1, H8, and H11, as well as the vaccination of frontliners and government officials in H2, H5, and H12, the readers may also be encouraged to get vaccinated, because if a well-respected doctor got vaccinated, then why shouldn't they? Moreover, the mention of Galvez in H3 and H7 also helps to attract interest and attention among readers. The fourth discursive device is immediacy, which grabs people's attention because it marks recency and timeliness. This can be seen in the use of the present tense of the verbs, such as receives in H1 and administers in H4, and the other headlines presented on the screen. Lastly, the use of quantifiers in the headlines helps to concretize the goal of the vaccine rollout and attracts attention because of the presentation of numbers. This can be seen in H5, where it is indicated that there is a goal of having 100 PGH staff to be vaccinated, and in H2, which reports that over 700 were successfully vaccinated by the end of day 1 of the rollout. The interviews conducted provide a better context and understanding of the use of the discursive devices previously mentioned. The discursive devices reflect the main themes highlighted by the informants regarding the articles they have written, which include vaccine hesitancy, reference to the illegal use of vaccines prior to the March 1 rollout, and inclusion of elite people or roles in the headlines. From the interviews conducted, the following factors were noted as noteworthy when constructing headlines: clarity, accuracy, optimization or prominence through the use of keywords, newness, brevity, newsworthiness, and it must also be noted that the editor has the final say in what headline will be published. For the macro analysis, social cultural practice and discourse practice were employed. Last March 1, 2021, the official rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine was administered in the country. The first recipient of the official jab was the PGH head, Dr. Legaspi, followed by other government officials and medical frontliners. During this period, the country faced several setbacks regarding the delay of the arrival of different COVID-19 vaccines, including AstraZeneca, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and Novavax. Alongside this low supply of vaccines was a number of increasing daily COVID-19 cases and an increasing vaccine hesitancy among the public. This vaccine hesitancy predicament can be attributed to several factors, including misinformation and a past controversy regarding a dengue fever vaccine. Upon the news of the arrival of different vaccines, several confusing information spread about its efficacy, leading many people to refuse being vaccinated or wait for a better option. Many experts also identify the Dengvaxia controversy as a reason for the quick dismissal of the COVID vaccine's efficacy by the Filipino people, as the makers of this vaccine released that the children vaccinated with Dengvaxia who have never had dengue fever would be at higher risk of getting hospitalized or having a severe case of dengue if they were to be infected. A month after the vaccine rollout, the Philippines recorded its all-time high record of 15,310 new cases in a day. Despite the surge in cases, a survey conducted from April 28 to May 2, 2021 shows that only 32% of adult Filipinos were willing to get vaccinated if they had a chance to be given a free vaccine that can prevent COVID-19, which has been approved by the Food and Drug Administration. The top reasons of those who are uncertain or unwilling included the questioning of its safety and efficacy, that could possibly lead to death. As of June 20, 2021, around 8.4 million doses of vaccines have been administered, which only makes up 2% of our population. This concern of vaccine hesitancy is given emphasis in all three of the interviews conducted. All three informants mentioned the state of vaccine hesitancy in the country, hence the need for news headlines and articles to be carefully written in order to prevent the spread of further misinformation. Moreover, this socio-cultural practice is reflected in H9, where the use of amid uncertainty refers to the high vaccine hesitancy in the country. Ever since the start of the pandemic, the Duterte administration has securitized COVID-19 by framing the pandemic as war, a fight for the nation's survival. The securitization, which has identified the virus as a threat, has taken a more militaristic approach than a medical one in responding to the dangers posed by the pandemic, delegitimizing the claims and requests of healthcare professionals and silencing dissent. This has led many Filipinos to disapprove of the current administration's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a study by the ASEAN Studies Center, which involved responses of 1,032 respondents from all 10 ASEAN countries, through an online survey conducted from November 18, 2020 to January 10, 2021, 17.9% of Filipinos strongly disapprove of the Duterte government's pandemic response, the highest strong disapproval rating among Southeast Asian countries. The Filipinos who strongly disapprove indicated that they believe that the Duterte government must encourage more scientists and medical doctors to contribute to public policy discussions and heed their advice in order for the government to better address COVID-19. Some of the headlines chosen also reflect this disappointment and acknowledgement of the failed response of the government in the pandemic by intentionally including the words legal, first, and official to provide context to the use of COVID-19 vaccines by officials even before it officially rolled out in the country. Despite these setbacks, the headlines also attempt to provide an update on the government response in a positive light by using positive evaluative language as seen in H4, H6, H7, H8, H9, H10, H11, and H12. In this section, the processes involved in the production of online news headlines with a focus on the process of the construction of these headlines and the value of news headline production are studied. The online news sources selected for this research are ABS-CBN News Online, GMA News Online, Inquirer.net, Rappler, and CNN Philippines. According to a survey by Digital News Report in 2020, these outlets are among the top 6 of the sites with highest weekly online reach and among the top 14 of the most trusted brands in online news. In constructing headlines, the responses of the 3 journalists that were interviewed emphasize the importance of accuracy and optimization in delivering these headlines. According to informant number 1, accuracy is the most important factor to consider when writing headlines because the accuracy of information cannot suffer just to make way for an eye-catching or concise headline. Moreover, informant number 2 adds that she has recently been more careful in wording headlines related to vaccines as accurately as she can in order to avoid misinterpretation. In addition to this, the optimization of the headlines, especially in the digital age, should be considered in the construction of headlines. From the inclusion of keywords to prominence of the headline, it is crucial to optimize the titles of articles in order to get people to read the news and have an idea on what the article is about. Across the three news outlets, our informants indicated that headlines are the responsibility of the editor. However, even though it is the editor who has the final say on the headline to be published, journalists often lay out the foundations and give suggestions in the title. Remarkably, the informant from GMA News Online shared that their editors prefer that talking heads are in the headline and added that it was the editor who placed the word official in the news headline H4 Philippines administers first official COVID-19 vaccine jab. Or, for more informants, it is clear that the media is aware of its power and influence to disseminate information and influence the public's minds, especially when it comes to discussions on COVID-19 vaccines. This is also reflected in their aim to reach the general public by the use of inclusive and optimized terms. This section provides an overview on how the chosen online news headlines can be interpreted by its target audience. Given that all the outlets chosen are produced online, they are readily accessed by anyone who has an internet connection. As seen in the simple and general lexical devices used in the headlines, the target audience is the general public. This is reflected by the rare use of names of people on the headlines, unless they are very prominent, as informant number 3 shares that they rarely use the names of people unless it's a very prominent person that a man on the street would recognize. Informant number 1 also explains that the articles that they write aim to be understood by anyone, may it be a licensed professional or a high school student. Ultimately, these texts produced have the capacity to influence the cognitive thinking and social action of its readers. In conclusion, the prevailing small d discourse in the headlines regarding the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines is the use of discursive devices, namely evaluative language, vocabulary, reference to elite people, and/or role label, immediacy, and quantification in the construction of headlines. These are then used to reflect a specific angle of telling a story. The following big D discourses are indicated by the chosen headlines on the vaccine rollout: critique on the government, legitimization of vaccines, and instillment of hopefulness in readers. The critique on the government is seen in the use of evaluative language and immediacy, used in 8 out of 12 and 7 out of 12 of the news articles selected. These headlines highlight the active role of the government in the vaccine rollout through the use of words such as administers and begins. However, 7 out of 12 of the headlines were also found to have criticized the government's illegal use of vaccinations prior to the official vaccine rollout last March 1, 2021, through the use of vocabulary such as first ever, official, and legally. Moreover, the headlines also prioritize the promotion and legitimization of vaccines, as seen in the reference to elite people and/or role labels in 8 out of 12 articles which mention PGH Head and Galvez. Another underlying big D discourse in the headlines is instilling hopefulness among its readers. By providing quantifications, references to legitimate officials, and words evoking a positive reaction, the headlines tried to provide a sense of encouragement and hope among its readers on the progress and efficacy of vaccine. Despite the claims of major news sources on the objectivity of their reports, it is evident in the headline study that the angle of telling is a powerful tool employed in headline making to perpetuate certain ideologies regarding the government and vaccines. It is also important to consider the context where the small d and big D discourse are happening, that is, through an online platform using the English language for a general audience. Due to a small sample size, no far-reaching conclusions can be drawn from the 12 articles examined. The findings and analysis mentioned only concern the articles studied on vaccine rollout in the Philippines last March 1, 2021, and thus cannot be generalized to apply to the analysis of headlines of other events and news genres. However, the analytical tools and methodology employed may be used by other research to further study similar topics of research. The limitations of this study include a limited time for the period of research, which hindered the researchers from collecting more responses and data samples, as well as conducting more interviews with informants.
Okay, thank you. Ganda naman, may music pa tayo sa dulo. Okay, so thank you, Nika and Joshua, for your presentation. And thank you also to all my students and, of course, the participants of their respective studies, no? Um, for these researches, no? Okay, so now let's proceed to the open forum. Siguro, let's start first with the question that I asked in our last class. No, maybe you can share what you learned this semester, either about doing ethnographic research on language use, or uh, maybe the particular topic that you did research on. No? Sige. So let's just go briefly per group. Okay, let's start with the first presentation. Ano ba yung first presentation natin? Si Ka-Barangay. Jeydah or Nina?
Hello. I think I'll answer the question along muna
Okay.
first. Okay. So for me, what I learned in doing this research, well, first, I think, personally, my experience in doing the research is quite unique because I was a member of the community that my group was also studying. So I had to question what I thought I already knew and unfamiliarize myself with the environment that was already so familiar to me. Um, so yeah, I think like with the help of my group mates and of course ma'am's guidance, we were able to combine both the inside and outside perspectives and make an ethic in order to have a better understanding of the big D discourses that goes on with the community. Of course, being a member of the community had its pros also, which was that we had access to the inside perspective. So yeah, in constructing our research, we combined what we gathered from our data collection and from our ethnographic interviews. Of course, we also put in some of our insights and what applied the methods that we learned from our reading. And yeah, we were able to present what we showed here in the audience today. And I also learned the importance of for the leadership bodies to not take such an authoritative role or tone when addressing the people who they are leading. I think it's really important for them to be able to connect, and that's why I really love the um I really love that the COVID-19 circulars, specifically the one in our study, opened with Dear Ka-Barangay because it really gives a sense of togetherness and it draws attention to the mutual responsibility the of the leadership and the other stakeholders in order to disseminate information and as well as to work together in order to for the benefit of the bigger community, especially during the trying times such as the COVID-19 we are facing today. So yeah, that's my takeaway from doing this research.
Yeah, Jeydah?
Hello. So for me, I think that I learned more about these announcements and that they are not just mere announcements of news in the community and also rules because the as we presented a while ago, the circulars also allow the residents to pattern their daily routines on what they can do and what they cannot do, and also um maybe this communication channel is adaptable to other places also because as we've said, some communication channels are disrupted during this pandemic, and it's important to maximize the opportunities.
Okay, sige, thank you, no? Thank you for those insights. So siguro to clarify to our audience, no? When I asked the students to choose a topic, because of our situation in remote learning, I did ask them to consider, no, the feasibility of their study, no, in terms of what can be accessible. So even if there's a lot of material that can be accessible online, um, because they, I asked them to do interviews as well, no, for us to have a better understanding of what these utterances, these discourses might mean to those who produce them. They had to consider really what the people, no, that they could have access to. Some like in this particular project, perhaps it's there's more access, but for some they chose to I guess, choose topics that medyo suntok sa buwan ng approach. No? Parang, sige, let's try this one and see if people respond. And I think some did. No? I think in the case of yung last group natin, no? Nika and Joshua, did you know any of the writers or journalists?
We didn't know them personally. We just took a shot at trying to schedule an interview with them, and luckily some of them responded to us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe we can proceed to the question. So did you learn anything about your topic or about doing ethnographic research in this process?
For me personally, I learned a lot on how they can frame something to make it look more positive. For example, the vaccines. So they wanted to take on the increasing vaccine hesitancy in the country. So they made it easy to understand for the average person to understand what they're talking about. So, ayun.
Nika?
Okay, for me naman, I guess, related also to the angle of telling, like no matter how much they claim to be objective, um, the angle of telling is still like a tool that's really very much employed in the process of headline making. And I guess on a more personal note, I've learned to be more reflexive also, especially when digesting these things. Because I remember when you're collecting data, there would be times when we are super quick to dismiss like some headlines because based on our standards or experience, the words you seem to be objective. But once we analyze them, especially using the discursive devices, you're able to figure out that they may actually be intentionally used to have a certain meaning.
Mm-mm. Yes, so yung ating power, no, yung ating politics of language use. Very applicable talaga siya sa mass media, no? Okay, sige, thank you. Let's go to the quarant tweet group, si Nathan and Putri.
Hello po. So yung ano po, ilan lang po sa na-realize ko rin nung ginagawa po namin yung project. Siguro po yung importance po ng little and small details kasi po lalo na po dun sa mga tweets and sa mga materials na nag-gather namin kasi po yung yun nga po katulad po ng na-mention namin sa report is yung message form po yung mas tinugunan namin nung nag-a-analyze po kami. And sa mga tweets po parang may mga interjections doon tsaka mga small phrases, emojis katulad ng ha, yung mga smiley face, lol, mga ganun. Sobrang important pala nun kasi nung kapag kukunin po namin yung message ng tweet tsaka yung emotion ng tweet, parang malaking factor siya. Tapos mas na-appreciate ko rin po yung importance ng interview nung ano po sa pag-come up po namin ng conclusion and ng big D discourse. Kasi nung una po parang since online po yung setup, parang ino-overlook ko po yung interview. And
Mm.
parang nung parang nung ginawa na po namin and after po ng pag-transcribe namin, parang sobrang laking tulong po nito sa pag-come up namin ng Big D discourse. Tapos ang dami ko rin po natutunan sa mga sagot um nung interview po namin. Yan lang.
Okay. Oh, sige, salamat. Si Putri naman, would you like to add something?
Hello. So sa akin naman po, iba po talaga yung challenge sa pag-aaral ng discourses online since di tulad sa physical na makikita talaga natin yung body language and others na makakatulong sa context. Since yung mga tweets din po, pwedeng ma-interpret in different ways. Tulad ng tones, iba-iba talaga yung pagkakaintindi natin. Tapos na-prove din po ng study namin na marami yung may pare-parehong sentiments tungkol sa incompetence ng government pagdating sa handling ng pandemic, though hindi lahat ay ganito yung sentiments. At dito na po prove na reflective talaga ang language sa culture. Ayun.
Okay, sige. And then yung huli nating group, yung sa nag-research sa HOH Facebook group. So, sina Cheska, Mau, Chelsea, and Jules.
Hi po, ma'am. First of all, sobrang felt po nung sabi po ni Putri na mahirap po yung online na research project. Lalo na po for us kasi po, most of our respondents were, we couldn't conduct video calls with them because nga of their hearing status. So, nawawala na po agad sa amin yung layer of communication of gesture and facial expression. So it was hard for us to like compensate for that. And then personally po for me, ang na-realize ko po talaga through our research project was how lacking yung policy making ng government is with regards to the rights and the dignities of people who are differently abled. And kita-kita po dun sa post sa group and sa narratives na shinare po nila sa amin through the interviews na there is neglect on the part of the government sa mga rights nila. And I feel that um, even in the academe, there's also a huge gap in the knowledge that we have regarding their status. So I feel that maybe we can also look into their narratives and see how we can help uplift their statuses. Parang ganun po.
Yes, that's true. Anyone else from the group? Okay. So wala na raw. Si Mau na raw yung representative. Yes, I think you raise a good point. And yung sinasabi mo nga na parang pati sa academe, no, it's also something that we should consider. There are methodological biases talaga, no? For the longest time, at least in ethnography, the discussion of participant observation, na parang bakit observation? So it was parang meron siyang pag-prioritize sa site, no? Na ano yan parang I guess it's an unconscious bias, 'di ba? It's also almost naturalized na parang you only see you can only understand the truth if you see it, 'di ba? Yung to see is to believe. So it's one of the critiques, no, in ethnography that there's a priority to seeing, no, to observing. And then eventually lumabas na rin yung we should include other senses, no, na parang we should also kind of include in our data yung how we feel na when we are in the field, no. Now of course na-deprive din tayo diyan dahil we had to conduct nga all our research, no, remotely, no. So yun, medyo nawala din yon. But I think it's also a good point that we always emphasize do interviews, ganyan. And of course, it's almost, 'di ba, parang normal to think we record it, 'di ba? Because the assumption is it's going to be oral or spoken, no? I think you raise a good methodological issue, no? At least in your research, where we have to shift gears also, no? Because there are different kinds of communities, different kinds of individuals who have different abilities, no? And we have to calibrate, or keep on calibrating our methodologies to be in that particular position. No? So thinking that there's something that we lose, no, so to speak, perhaps if it's not like a face to face or it's not an audio interview, no. Um, Perhaps we also have to consider other modes of inquiry, of inquiring, no, of asking. So kumbaga, if we do it all textually, no, how do we develop methodologies that kind of prioritize that kind of mode of questioning, no? Kasi I think yun, and that's even in anthropology, no, it's always been yun na nga, an unconscious bias, right? That we always do interviews as if we assume that everybody can hear, everybody can speak, no, and that's something we have to reconsider, no. So magandang na point out din yon. So it's not just in terms of how we can create an inclusive inclusive um ano ba yon, life world, social world, no, for individuals, no, or groups who have different abilities. But I think even research wise, no, as academics, we also have to be attuned, no, to these kinds of these differences, no. Well, sa social science, diba, may tinatawag ng the multiple publics, and I think that's one of the things that we have to also focus on, no. Okay. I don't think we have questions from our audience, no. But I do want to say, no, that hopefully, no, that in your projects, that one, you kind of, kasi medyo, I think this is your first time na unang salang ito ng students in doing, at least for most of you, I think, no, in doing ethnographic research. So I'm hoping that learning about particular communities or learning how to listen and to observe for other points of view, no, it's something that you learned here. That's one of the main objectives of doing ethnography, no, getting outside of yourself and trying to listen like really closely to how other people perceive, no, their life or understand their life or even live their lives, no. So that's one. And of course, now hopefully by ewan ko kung na-trauma kayo kakaurirat sa mga sa discourse, no, but hopefully by doing your research, no, in linguistic anthropology, yun nga, I think some of you said, no, medyo mas nagre-reflect ka na dun sa mga naririnig mo, dun sa mga nababasa natin, no. Parang hopefully you become more attuned to how our use of language can ano ba, affect the way people see themselves, the way we see ourselves, no? So I think that's very important, no? And language, like I said, for the most part, diba sabi nga ni Sapir, ang language for the most part ay unconscious. We just kind of use it, no? But we're not aware of what the implications, no, of language use might be. And hopefully this is something that you learned, no, doing your varied research projects. Okay, sige. So I think we can end our afternoon session. Anyway, it's malapit na rin mag 4 o'clock. So thank you very much to all our viewers on Facebook, for all those who participated in the research projects, and of course to my dear students who were so tiyaga, no. I have to commend you in your CPAG, no. I didn't know what to expect during the semester for a method course. I was pleasantly surprised by your diligent work, no. Na mayat maya nagko-consult ko, ako yung nalula sa kasipagan ninyo. So maraming salamat, no. Sige. Okay, now siguro to end our session, I just want to thank also our transcriber, Dominic Revadulia, our live transcriber, yung nagka-caption sa atin this afternoon. And of course, the technical assistance of some of my students, Francesca Santiago, Francesca Mauricio, and Chelsea Aquino, no, who's helping us out also in our technology here. Okay, so this ends our one-day event, studying discourses in the time of COVID. This is the public presentation of the research projects, no, for the course Anthro 194, Research Methods in Linguistic Anthropology. This is brought to you by the Linguistic Anthropology Resource Center of the UP Department of Anthropology. So I'm Monica Santos, no, their teacher. I hope to see you again in our future events and programs. Good afternoon, everyone.